Hello students, welcome back to another session of history. Today we are on lesson number 5, rulers and buildings. Now in this chapter we will see that between the 18th and the 8th century, the kings and their officers built two kinds of structures, that is forts, palaces, then gardens, residence, and tombs and temples, mosques, tanks, then bazaars, etc. So these are the things which are built during the 8th and 18th century by the kings, by the rulers. Now, figure number 1 shows the first balcony of the Qutub Minar. Qutbuddin Aibak had this constructed around 1199. Notice the pattern created under the balcony by the small arches and geometrical design. Can you see two bands of inscriptions under the balcony? Inscriptions means the written document. So the written document, see, it is here on the bands, isn't it? Noticing that the surface of the minar is curved and angular, placing an inscription on such a surface required great precision. Only the most skilled craftsperson could perform this task. Remember that very few buildings were made of stone or bricks 800 years ago. What would have been the impact of a building like the Qutub Minar on observers in the 13th century? Between the 8th and the 18th centuries, kings and their officers built two kinds of structures. The first were forts, palaces, gardens, residences, and tombs, safe, protected, and grandiose places of rest in this world. And the second were structures meant for public activity, including temples, mosques, tanks, wells, caravanserais, and bazaars. Kings were expected to care for their subject, and by making structures for their use and comfort, rulers hoped to win their praise. Construction activity were also carried out by others, including merchants. They built temples, mosques, and wells. However, domestic architectures, large mansion Havelis of merchants had survived only from the 18th century. Engineering skills and constructions. Monuments provide an insight into the technologies used for construction. Take something like a roof, for example. We can make this by placing wooden beams or a slab of stone across 4 walls. But the task becomes difficult if we want to make a large room with an elaborate superstructure. This requires more sophisticated skills. Between the 7th and the 10th centuries, architects started adding more rooms, doors and windows to buildings. Roofs, doors and windows were still made by placing a horizontal beam across 2 vertical columns, a style of architecture called trabiti or corbelled. Between the 8th and the 13th centuries, this trabiti style was used in the constructions of temple, mosques, tombs, and in buildings attached to large steeped wells. Now, trabiti, it looks in this structure. Okay, this is a trabiti style which is used in the constructions of temples, mosques, tombs, and for many buildings. Now, temple construction in the early 11th century. The Kandiriya Mahadeva temple dedicated to Shiva was constructed in 999 by the king Dangadeva of the Chandala dynasty. Figure 3b is a plan of the temple. This is a plan of the temple Kandiriya Mahadeva. An ornamented gateway led to an entrance. and the main hall Mahamandapa, where dances were performed. The image of the chief deity was kept in the main shrine, Garbhagriha. This was the place of ritual worship where only the king, his immediate family, and priests gathered. The Khajuraho complex contained royal temples where commoners were not allowed entry. The temples were decorated with elaborately carved sculptures. So this was a plan, and this is a final. Temple. Now, in figure 4, the Raja Rajeshwara temple at Thanjavur had the tallest shikhara amongst temple of its time. Now, what is shikhara? Shikhara means the topmost point of the temple. This is the shikhara. Okay, the topmost point of the temples. Constructing it was not easy because there were no cranes in those days, and the 90-ton stone for the top of the shikhara was too heavy to lift manually. So the architects built an inclined path to the top of the temple. These are the inclined paths through which they can climb at the top of the temple. Placed the boulder on rollers and rolled it all the way to the top. The path started more than 4 kilometers away so that it would not be too steep. This was dismantled after the temple was constructed. But the residents of the area remember the experience of the constructions of the temple for a long time. Even now, a village near the temple is called Charupalam, the village of the incline. The two technological and stylish developments are noticeable from the 12th century. The weight of the superstructure above the doors and the windows was sometimes carried by arches. This architectural form was called arcuate. A true arch, this is an arch, the keystone at the center of the arch transferred the weight of the superstructure to the base of the arch. Limestone cement was increasingly used in the construction. This was very high quality cement which when mixed with stone chips hardened into concrete. This made constructions of large structures easier and faster. Take a look at the construction site in figure 6. So where is the figure 6? This is the construction sites which was used by the limestone cement. A painting from the Akbarnama showing the constructions of the water gate at the Agra fort. Building temples, mosques and tanks. Temples and mosques were beautifully constructed because they were places of worship. They were also meant to demonstrate the power, wealth and devotions of the patron. Take the example of the Raja Rajeshwara temple. An inscription mentions that it was built by the king Raja Rajasdeva for the worship of his god Raja Rajeshwaram. Notice how the names of the ruler and the god are very similar. The king took the god's name because it was auspicious and he wanted to appear like a god. Through the rituals of worship in the temple, one god, Raja Rajasdeva, honored another, Raja Rajeshwaram. The largest temples were also constructed by kings. The other lesser deities in the temple were gods and goddesses of the allies and subordinates of the ruler. The temple was a miniature model of the world ruled by the king and his allies. As they worshipped their deities together in the loyal temples, it seemed as if they brought the just rule of the gods on earth. Muslim sultans and padshahs did not claim to be incarnations of God, but Persian court chronicles describe the sultans as a shadow of God. And inscriptions in the Kuwait al-Islam mosque explained that God chose Alauddin as a king because he had the qualities of Moses and Solomon. the great lawgivers of the past. The greatest lawgiver and architect was God Himself. He created the world out of chaos and introduced others and symmetry. As each new dynasty came to power, kings wanted to emphasize their moral right to be rulers. Constructing places of worship provided rulers with the chance to proclaim their close relationship with God, especially important in an age of rapid political change. Rulers also offered patronage to the learned and pious and tried to transform their capitals and cities into great cultural centers that brought fame to their rule and their realm. It was widely believed that the rule of a just king would be an age of plenty, when the heavens would not withhold rain. At the same time, making precious water available by constructing tanks and reservoirs was highly praised. Sultan Iltutmish owns universal respect for constructing a large reservoir just outside Delhi Khuna. It was called the Haji Sultani or the King's Reservoir. So, can you find in map 1 in chapter 3? Rulers often constructed tanks and reservoirs, big and small, for use by ordinary people. Sometimes these tanks and reservoirs were part of a temple, mosque, or a gurudwara, a place of worship and congregations for Sikh. Why were temples destroyed? Because kings built temples to demonstrate their devotions to God and their power and wealth. It is not surprising that when they attacked one another's kingdom, they often targeted these buildings. In the early 9th century, when the Pandya king Srivalabha invaded Sri Lanka and defeated the king Sena I, the Buddhist monk and chronicle Dhammakiti noted, he removed all the valuables. The statue of the Buddha made entirely of gold in the jewel palace, and the gold images in the various monasteries, all this ceased. The blow to the pride of Sinhalese ruler had to be avenged, and the next Sinhalese ruler, Sena II, ordered his general to invade Madurai, the capital of the Pandyas. The Buddhist chronicle noted that the expeditions made a special effort to find and restore the gold statue of the Buddha. Similarly, in the early 11th century, when the Chola king Rajendra I built a Shiva temple in his capital, he filled it with prize statues seized from defeated rulers. An incomplete list included a sun pedestal from the Chalukyas, a Ganesha statue, and several statues of Durga. A Nandi statue from the eastern Chalukyas, an image of Bhairava, a form of Shiva, and Bhairavi from the Kalingas of Orissa, and a Kali statue from the Palas of Bengal. Sultana Muhammad of Ghazni was a contemporary of Rajendra I. During his campaign in the subcontinent, he also attacked the temples of defeated kings and looted their wealth and idols. Sultan Muhammad was not a very important ruler at that time, but by destroying temples, especially the one at Somnath, he tried to win credit as a great hero of Islam. In the political culture of the Middle Ages, most rulers displayed their political might and military success by attacking and looting the places of worship of defeated rulers. Now, garden tombs and forts. Under the Mughal architecture became more complex. Babur, Humayun, Akbar, Jahangir, and especially Shah Jahan were personally interested in literature, art, and architecture. In his autobiography, Babur described his interest in planning and laying out formal gardens placed within rectangular walled enclosures and divided into 4 quarters by artificial channels. These gardens were called Chahar Bagh, 4 gardens, because of the symmetrical divisions into quarters. Beginning with Akbar, some of the most beautiful Chahar Bagh were constructed by Jahangir and Shah Jahan in Kashmir, Agra, and Delhi. There were several important architectural innovations during Akbar's reign. For inspirations, Akbar architect turned to the tombs of his Central Asian ancestor, Timur. The central towering tomb and dome and the tall gateway became important aspects of Mughal architecture. First visible in Humayun's tomb, the tomb was placed in the center of a huge formal Bagh and built in the tradition known as the Eight Paradises or Hast Bishit, a central hall surrounded by 8 rooms. The building was constructed with red sandstone edged with white marble. It was during Shah Jahan's reign that the different elements of Mughal architectures were first together in a grand, harmonious synthesis. His region witnessed a huge amount of construction activity, especially in Agra and Delhi. The ceremonial halls of public and private audience, Diwane-Khazo were carefully placed within a large courtyard. These courts were also described as Chihil Sutun or 40 pillared halls. Shah Jahan's audience halls were specially constructed to resemble a mosque. The pedestal on which his throne was placed was frequently described as the Qibla, the direction faced where Muslims at prayer, since everybody faced that directions when court was in session. The idea of the kings as a representative of God on earth was suggested by these architectural features. The connection between royal justice and the imperial court was emphasized by Shah Jahan in his newly constructed court in the Red Fort at Delhi. Behind the emperor's throne was a series of Pietra Dura. Now, Pietra Dura, colored hard stones placed in depressions, curved into marble or sandstone, creating beautiful ornate patterns. Inlays that depicted the legendary Greek god Orpheus playing the lute. It was believed that Orpheus' music could calm ferocious beasts until they coexisted together peacefully. The constructions of Shah Jahan's audience hall aimed to communicate that the king's justice would treat the high and the low as equal, creating a world where all could live together in harmony. In the early years of his reign, Shah Jahan's capital was at Agra, a city where the nobility had constructed their homes on the banks of the river Yamuna. These were set in the midst of formal gardens constructed in the Chahar Bagh format. The Chahar Bagh garden also had a variations that historians describe as a river front garden. In this, the dwelling was not located in the middle of the Chahar Bagh but at its edge, close to the banks of the river. Shah Jahan adapted the riverfront gardens in the layout of the Taj Mahal, the grandest architectural accomplishment of his region. Here, the white marble mausoleum was placed on a terrace by the edge of the river, and the gardens was to its south. Shah Jahan developed this architectural form as a means to control the access that nobles had to the river. In the new city of Shahjahanabad that he constructed in Delhi, the imperial palace commanded the river front. Only specially favored nobles like his eldest son Dara Shikoh were given access to the river. All others had to construct their homes in the city away from the river Yamuna. Now, region and empire. The Mughal rulers were particularly skilled in adapting regional architectural style in the constructions of their own buildings. In Bengal, the local rulers had developed a roof that was designed to resemble a thatched hut. The Mughals liked this Bangla dome. Now, in this topic, the garden tombs and fort, we saw that Babur was interested in planning and laying out formal gardens placed within rectangular wall. As you can see this is a rectangular wall. Then enclosures and divided into 4 quarters by artificial channels. These are the 4 artificial channels. These gardens were called Chahar Bagh, 4 gardens. 1, 2, 3, 4. which were divided into 4 quarters. Now, during the Akbar's regime also, tomb architecture became important. His architecture turned to the tombs of his Central Asian ancestors, Timur. After that, during Shah Jahan's reign, huge constructions activity was carried out in Agra and Delhi. Shah Jahan audience halls were specially constructed to resemble a mosque. He adapted the riverfront garden in the layout of the Taj Mahal. As you can see, the constructions of the Taj Mahal, he had also followed the rectangular wall enclosure and divided the garden into 4 quarters. See, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then the white marble mausoleum was placed on a terrace by the edge of the river, and the gardens was to his south. Shah Jahan developed this architectural form as a means to control the access that nobles had to the river. Now, in the topic region and empire, the Mughal rulers were particularly skilled in adapting regional architectural styles. Like, as constructions activity increased between the 8th and the 18th century, there were also a considerable sharing of ideas across regions. The traditions of one region was adopted by another. In Vijayanagara, for example, the elephant stables of the rulers were strongly influenced by the style of the architecture found in the adjoining sultanates of Bijapur and Golconda. In Vrindavan, near Mathura, temples were constructed in architectural styles that were very similar to the Mughal palaces in Fatehpur Sikri. So the temples in the Vrindavan and the Mathura, they were similar with the temples of the Mughal palaces, that is in Fatehpur Sikri. The creation of large empires that brought different regions under their rule helped in their cross-fertilizations of artistic forms and architectural styles. Mughal rulers were particularly skilled in adapting regional architectural styles in the constructions of their own buildings. In Bengal, for example, the local rulers had developed a roof that was designed to resemble a thatched house or hut. The Mughals liked this Bangla dome so much that they used in their architecture. The impact of other regions was also evident. In Akbar's capital at Fatehpur Sikri, many of the buildings show the influence of the architectural styles of Gujarat and Malwa. Even though the authority of the Mughal rulers went in the 18th century, the architectural styles developed under their patronage were constantly used and adapted by other rulers whenever they tried to establish their own kingdoms. Now, this is the end of the chapter. Next time I will meet you with a new chapter. Till then, students, take care and thank you so much.